and I'll come in and maybe do like a FaceTime situation with them. Like I'll meet with them, assess them, talk with them, and they can't go out, to go look at facilities in person. So I'll bring, it's this little device that kind of, a little bendable arm, and I set a tablet on it. I'll show up at the facility and just basically say, okay, we have an 8:15 tour. I get to the facility and they can ask all the questions they would like and see the place as best as they can through, a video.
Very cool.
I think that's a, pretty unique situation that I do for folks. Or, like last weekend, I had to go and meet with a family out in Queen Creek, because they, one of the family members had some health, issues themselves and some limitations, and really wasn't going to be feasible for them to get her out to come and meet with me. So, whatever I need to do to be there for families, I get calls from the Tempe Fire Department, patient advocate services and crisis prevention team all the time, and I'll go out and meet with people in their home with the Tempe Fire, sometimes with police and whatever the situation may be. I've had to honestly gowned up in hazmat, suits to go into some pretty unique situations with the Tempe Fire. So it's definitely, whatever I need to do to be able to serve the community, anything, everything. Meeting it in the hospitals I've sat with on the weekends in the evening with an entire family of 6-7 siblings that all flew in from out of town and are only in for a couple days so that we can do an emergency placement for mom or dad.
Intervention.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, having them all fire a bajillion questions at me, and I've seen some very unique family dynamics, and I try and help all of that out as well as best as I can, and provide them with any resources anybody may need, whether it's an elder law attorney or counseling and grieving services and funerals, services, and home health, hospice, home care, durable medical equipment, medical marijuana, anything that you can possibly think of that could be in the senior care industry. I try and have a resource for so that I can help folks out. So I make my income, being a quote unquote placement agent, but I don't consider myself a placement agent because that's not. When I meet with families, that's not what I have any intention of doing. It's always just advising. And so if it happens to yield that somebody lands in a place and they're privately paying, then I can send a referral fee out, a referral and get that fee for it. And if not, and it's state Medicaid or it ends up being a referral for elsewhere, then I'm able to help that family out. And to me, it's one and the same, and it really doesn't matter. That's how I think that assisted living locators culture is really grown so much is because of that business model.
Yeah, I think that definitely is a differentiator and something that sets you apart, and I applaud you for your efforts in that regard. My curiosity will not let me rest if I don't follow up on your hazmat situation. Was that in regard to like a fire situation, or was it like a cat hoarder, or what?
Bed bug, actually.
Oh, bed
bug. Yeah, pretty serious bed bug infestation, where like you can literally see hundreds of them crawling around. It was pretty alarming. I had to go back and do a decon back at the station afterwards. It was an interesting situation for sure. But we were able to help the family out and get the gentleman placed. I feel good about it.
What precautions did you take in that situation to decontaminate? Did he basically come with nothing and no bedding, no clothes, nothing to the facility, or how did that work to make sure that?
Yeah. He had to be deconned himself prior to even any placement. Yeah.
I imagine that wasn't fun. From my limited experience, I know that seniors don't like to take showers or baths because it's cold and it's uncomfortable. But I imagine he would scrub down pretty good before they got him over to the new facility.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I wasn't there for that portion of it because it was a psych situation, obviously, and was a lot of moves that had to be made there for sure. A lot of different services that were put into play.
One thing you mentioned, I know that your philosophy is to provide service and basically share the knowledge that you've gained with people who are in this situation, whether it be the family members, the seniors themselves, and you have a wide variety of resources to share. When you are looking at placing someone in a home, and you mentioned there are some homes that take state-assisted all-text payments or traditional assisted living facilities, whether it be residential or facilities such as Brookdale that you had some experience with in the past. What kind of, I guess, needs or requirements is there something that would shift you in one direction, like a large facility like a Brookdale or in a smaller residential facility? Are there certain criteria that would push you in one direction or other?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously cost, is a huge factor for folks. And it is unfortunate to say that money drives the whole situation, but good care costs money. It really does. So the more the place costs, typically, honestly, the better the care is that's there. Not always in every case, but the majority of the time, facilities that have a higher cost typically provide a lot better services, because they utilize that income coming in to either have better staffing ratios, better food quality, maintenance of the grounds facility, and just all kinds of different things, activity level, more amenity type services, but even from a care standpoint, so just tons of different things, where you'll have people that will hire a cook and then so that their care staff is not, even if we're talking about a residential facility, they have a cook and that way their care staff is not having to do the cooking, and there's all kinds of different things like that. So that's obviously a big factor. Acuity level for sure. I think that bigger facilities struggle significantly with handling our two-person Hoyer assist and tube feeds and again just higher acuity levels like that. Their response time is not quite as good, and their ratio of caregiver to resident is typically not as good as our smaller facilities. So they can handle a lot acuity levels, but then you take our very social folks and they don't do super great in group home environment or residential care home, and they're a lot of times they don't have the income to be able to provide a lot of the activities and socialization that places require, or that folks require, and that's why I say the homes that maybe they have charge a little bit more of a premium, typically will that's where they differentiate themselves, and so they kind of maybe are a mix between that community and a home-like environment. But the other things are factors too. Like I'll take an example recently that I've had of a gentleman, and he doesn't have like traditional dementia, even though they are dementia-like symptoms. He's got a tumor that causes dementia-like behavior, but it's not all the time. Mm-hmm. And so he's very, very lucid in a lot of senses and very, very high functioning. And so a lot of times, in my opinion, taking somebody like that or even, early stages of dementia where we don't have wandering, it's not always a good placement to go into a secured memory care environment, because then they are surrounded with folks a lot of times, like anywhere from 50 to 80% of the community could be a lot further along in the disease process and at different stages, but nonetheless, tough for somebody to be around that is going to be cognizant of the fact that they're around folks that are at that level. So a lot of times, but taking them maybe then to a assisted living, you can't do, because their protocol based on, their kind of assessment is automatically going to place them in their memory care environment. So I might feel like that's the most appropriate, but they're going to be apprehensive, from a liability standpoint, which I get. There is a huge potential maybe for elopement or other issues that could transpire from the dementia, that's present. Maybe in that sense, a care home can kind of act as a little bit both. So we could go and find somewhere where the patient population isn't demented or maybe very pleasantly confused like the resident, so that way there's high functioning conversations that can take place, but then still being able to be that protective, secured environment that the family really needs for their loved one, potentially, or just the ability for them to actually have the placement happen, because again, the assisted living are going to throw their hands up at any dementia-like situations like that. So, I that's just one example recently of what I've had to do to, guide a family in a certain situation because it seemed the most appropriate.
Well, I know that memory care is a big topic, and people with memory issues, everyone, it seems ideal. That's the one-stop solution. If you have, dementia, Alzheimer's, these memory issues, to go into memory care. But you bring up a great point that if they go into a place where the residents there at the memory care center are pretty far advanced and wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation about current events and things, it wouldn't serve the person who's early on in the stages. It wouldn't serve them well, because they wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation and have that, that wherewithal and people with whom to converse.
Exactly. So I'm not always a go-to fan of going the memory care route. It's not necessarily always the most appropriate thing to do. And families, you don't know what you don't know, and so they know you with the dementia diagnosis, well, we need to be looking into memory care. And a lot of times I don't think that that's the right answer. It can be in a lot of situations, but not necessarily every time.
What percentage of your patients or the clients that you work with, I'm guessing most of them are private pay when they're going into these facilities? I know you mentioned Altex a little bit, but is the majority a private pay situation?
No, I would say the majority are Altex, actually. Definitely. Like probably 80% of the referrals that I receive are Altex, and of some nature, whether it's immediate or they are limited income and are spending down to eventually roll on to Altex, maybe anywhere from somebody having $5,000 in their account, which would make them immediately not qualified financially for Altex, or having 100,000, which isn't going to last very long. When you start talking about higher expenses, if they're at a higher acuity level, if they're very high functioning, maybe independent living, that could last a little while, but still even not that long. Even independent living, you're talking probably minimum of $1,700 a month, and that's your lower income facility minimum. And so that 100,000 is not going to last super long, because that's not all they're paying for. They're still having to pay for toiletries often, and other different things, and
right.
Any bills they may have, cell phone, other, so it's not just 1,700. Maybe that they're having incontinence issues, and they're still able to handle that themselves, but their incontinence supplies, and there's all kinds of expenses that families accrue. And so yeah, it's definitely it's becoming more of an epidemic, I would say, from a state standpoint, and people not having the income for the care costs that are rising, and it's a double-edged sword, because I'm also seeing some changes in pricing due to the fact that you now have a minimum wage hike, and it's very difficult for homeowners to have quality staff, and not just homeowners, but also the communities. So there's I would say, a total industry-wide caregiver shortage because of that happening with a minimum wage hike here in Arizona. And that's definitely hurt, because, and I get it, who would want to, it's a tough, backbreaking work caring for the senior population, you have to have a big heart for it, and there's a, definitely it's just a tough job out there. So to be able to go and work at a fast food restaurant and make minimum wage, which is what caregivers were being paid, just roughly, on an average level, just a little bit over minimum wage, and so that has obviously made rates rise significantly, and then that creates a whole nother dynamic of the state situation. So I see a lot more state, and I think we'll see even more of it as we look later on, because you think of the generations now that aren't having as large of families, maybe not even having anybody to help make decisions, and